Hello. Lesson 1.3 presents to the students the singular personal pronouns. Now, why only the singular, not the plural as well? Remember that we're trying to train students to think in a manner which is consistent with the fluent speech of a native speaker of the language you're teaching them. We're trying to empower them as early as possible with the ability to form their own ideas, to ask their own questions and respond to our questions without simply parroting back to us the statements that we say. We want to empower them to express themselves. Now, in order to do that, we do not want to weigh them down with too much information at one time, because once you present the plural personal pronouns, you must also present the plural verb conjugations if that corresponds to the language you're teaching. And so to keep things as simple as we can initially, we just want the singular personal pronouns and therefore the singular verb conjugations, which you'll see in lesson 1.4, the very next lesson. They'll learn how to make a sentence negative in this first unit. They'll learn how to form a question in two different fashions, and they'll learn the 60 most commonly used verbs in any language in the course of this first unit. And so we're gonna just deal with the singular personal pronouns to begin, to keep things as simple as we can. Of course, we could present them with a chart. A chart in a period of 5 minutes, we could show them all the verb conjugations that exist in the language you're teaching very, very rapidly. But we would be in the process of doing that, we would be destroying the thought process we're trying to put in place in our students. That is to say, passing from the level of images and concepts directly to the target language without passing through the grid of printed text, of course, our native language, and also through the grid of rules and charts, graphs that they have to envision before they can form their statements. We want to avoid all of that. Okay. So lesson 1.3, the first section here, you'll see there's the video where I interact with the students and present the different personal pronouns to them. And by the way, those pronouns are I, you, and we'll talk about that's you formal. I will talk about that in a second. He and she. And in the second section, you can see that the students are to repeat what they hear, and they're to form the gestures imitating the video. This is a video just like they saw in lesson 1.2 that presented the verbs to them with a context video clip and a pronunciation video clip, etc. So we won't take a look at that since it's the same kind of a setup as the video you saw in lesson 1.2. Section 3, however, shows the still images for the different pronouns, and I'd like to talk about them for just a second here. You see that in this section what they're supposed to do is perform the gesture and say the word. And so when they come to this first one, they'll do this gesture, and they'll say, if it's in French, tu, or if it's in English, you, or in Spanish, tú. And then here they'll say she, or él, or ella, whatever language it happens to be. Let's just talk about the pronouns themselves for a second here. Here you see, let's go to the first person singular. Here is I. Now the little number 1 in the corner there emphasizes that we're dealing with just one person. This is a singular concept. This will become more important later on when they, for example, want to express you plural. The difference between you singular as far as the gesture is concerned in the picture, this is you singular. Notice I have a single finger I'm employing. You plural, which as you know in certain languages is a different word, has 2 fingers, and I'll be making a gesture such as this, indicating I'm speaking to more than one person. And so since in the still image that the difference between this and this is not extremely apparent, I put the little number in the corner to emphasize singular. For plural, they'll see 2, 3, ... as you will see when we get to the plural personal pronouns. Okay, so once again, this is right here. We have the first person singular, I. Here is you, and then he is over here. This is the third person singular. I'm referring to this boy down here. Obviously, I'm speaking about someone else, and in this case, it's a male, and so this is the third person singular masculine personal pronoun. And here's the feminine here. This is a girl right there. And so I'm talking about this girl, and I skipped, well, the second person formal, which is found right here. You see I'm bowing down, okay, to show the distinction between you and between you formal, you familiar and you formal. I bow my head as I point toward the person to show respect toward that person. Now, of course, in English, if you're teaching English, English as a second language, for example, you don't have a distinction. It's the same word. In fact, you plural, unless you're going to say y'all, you plural is the same word. So you, or you. It's all the same. Well, the students very quickly learn that as long as the person is referring to someone else or to a group of people or to another person bowing down for some reason, it's always the same word. So that won't cause difficulty in English. Now in other languages which have a distinct form for the formal, this is how I present that to the students. After they've seen the video that presents the different pronouns, then what I'll do is I'll ask the students, where do you live? Where do you live? I'll say, I live in Detroit, for example. I live in Detroit. And they'll say, where do you live? I live in Detroit. Where do you live? And they'll say the name of the town they come from. Don't expect a complete sentence. They haven't been trained to form a complete sentence yet. But they should say the name of the town they come from, Jonesville or something like that. And then when I will ask a student about another student. I'll say, where does he live? And they'll tell the name of the town where that student lives. Where does she live? And of course, I'm always performing the gestures. Every time I use these words, I will say, and she, where does she live? And the students will say the name of the town. Now, when I get to the formal you, what I do, typically I personally wear a suit and tie when I teach. And you can find some other form of getting this idea across. But what I'll do is I'll open the buttons on my shirt, I'll loosen my tie, slip the tie over my head, and I'll have one of the students stand up and go stand in the doorway. I'll put the tie around his or her neck, and then I'll come back and I'll start talking to the students. Where do you live? Where do you live? Where do you live? And then I'll turn toward the door. And then I stop as though I'm shocked because of this impressive dignitary who's appeared in our doorway. And I bow and say, and where do you live? And I'll say Mr., whatever the person's last name is, or Miss, whatever the person's last name is. I use a term of that they'll probably understand, which is a term showing respect for the individual. Okay, so that's a suggestion to you how you might get across the idea of the formal. Show honor to this person. Might want to show them in and show them to their seat, and then again, make a distinction between the way you address each of the other students and that individual. Go right down the row, and you, and you, and you, and you, and use the proper formal term for that individual. Okay, let me make this a little smaller so you can see the whole thing at one time. You're going to simply, in this particular section, of course, they're going to perform the gesture. They're going to say the word, and you can simply, as a group, read through this section. Now, when I say read through a section, how do you read something when there are no printed words? You handle it just the same way that you would with printed words. These are just images. You say you, she, you, I, he, you, she, except you go a little more slowly and give the students a chance to perform the gestures as they're reading through it with you. In the next section, this is where the first game comes in. We have the same kind of activity, exact same activity really, except that we've included the verbs that they learned in lesson 1.2. So you can read through this as well, but then after you've read through it, play a game with them. Divide the class into two teams and have one representative from each team, maybe the first student and the first seat of each of the two sides. Come to the screen, stand on opposite sides of the screen, and you're going to say, for example, wash, and they have to touch the screen, touch the verb wash. Of course, it appears up here more than once, as you'll see. But they'll have to touch the word wash, and the first one to touch it, their team gets a point. And then, and you can have that person, if you would like to, stay at the board and have the student who was not as rapid go sit down. The next student from their team comes up and challenges this individual, and you'll say she, and they'll point at the pronoun, which is she, and the first person who says it gets a point for their team, stays at the board, the other person sits down, etc. There are probably a number of varieties of ways in which you can do this, but that's probably the most common one there. And then the next section. This is a timing I'll make this a little bigger again so you can see it more easily, what I'm going to be doing with the stopwatch here. In a timing, the student is obliged to go through and read through all of the images in that section within the allotted period of time, which is in this case 35 seconds. What you do is you click on the stopwatch and it will open, and you'll hit run. And then this is important. Right mouse click on the bar at the top and choose always on top. And this way the stopwatch will always be available even if you click on the screen. It'll be visible. So I'll put it up here out of the way, off to the side, and I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Okay, here we go. I'm going to start the stopwatch, and then the student would be responsible to start reading. Now this is what the student would do if he or she were performing this individually, not as a game. I'll explain the game in a moment. Okay, here we go. Start. You, listen. I, you, listen. Live. She, wash. Say, he, you, wash. Do or make. You, say, make or do. She, make or do again. I, you, stop. Oh, I did in 23 seconds. Apparently, I was successful. I had 35 seconds. The time factor is very important. You want to get across to the students the idea that if they cannot keep up with that pace, if they can't complete the activity within that allotted period of time, they need to go back to a previous lesson or earlier in this lesson and get to know the images better, because what's happening is if they're taking longer than that, they may well be reflecting in their native language on the meaning of this word. They haven't developed yet the reflex response to the image that we want to be put in place. So make sure that they respect the time limit and to keep working at it until they can keep up with and complete the activity before that time is expired. Now, as far as a game is concerned, let me make this a little smaller again so you can see more of it. What I would simply do would be have one half of the class or one team. I would time them, and you'd time them in the exact same way you would an individual student, and you'll see how long it takes them and record on the board the period of time it took them to go through the entire list of words. You can have them do it one student at a time. You can have, let's say the first student is supposed to say you, and then once he said you go on to the next one. If a student is stuck, if they can't, they say pass. And if two students, this is a suggestion to you, if two students, and when they say pass, it means the next student over will have the chance to provide the word. If, I would say, 3 students in a row say pass, the team at that point gets no score. In essence, the team fails, and they have to, as a group, you need to be drilling that a little bit better so that you wouldn't have so many students unable to provide the word that corresponds to the image. And then you'd have the other team, assuming the first team got through that entire list of words, you'd have the other team perform the same activity, but I'd have them go in opposite order so that they aren't saying the exact same words in the exact same sequence as the first team, because it's kind of giving them an unfair advantage. By the way, you also can do it as a group. I should say 2 teams, but as a group, as opposed to having one student provide the word for you or listen or I. You can have the entire group within the team say the word, and as soon as you hear one of the students say it correctly, you move on to the next. Move on to the next as one person says it correctly at least. So that's another option for that particular game. And then last of all, whoa, a little too big there. Last of all, in the last section, you have the PowerPoint presentation, where in clicking on it, scroll down a little bit there, you'll watch a video in which the students have to provide the word. It's an accelerating video. They provide the word before they hear the word said to them. This would be I.
Je.
Now, it's wrong language, I'm sorry. Écoutez.
Écoutez.
They have to provide the answer before they hear it said over the speakers.
Qui.
Remember that this is accelerating, so initially they have 4 seconds.
Faire.
It'll go faster. They'll have 3 seconds halfway through, and they'll have 2 seconds to provide the proper answer at the very end. Okay.
Laver.
Laver, voilà. Okay, I hope that was helpful to you. Go get them. This is lesson 1.3.